really, really, I think, fascinating. I did it with Sita and Camel, and I don't know if you've actually all read it yet or sort of gone through it, but one of the topics that came up was technology, and it's not a huge part of the roundtable, but it is something that is very kind of close to me, because I'll give you a bit of a biography. I'm a writer and a poet, and I studied English at university, and all I ever did was English, and I was kind of encouraged to kind of do all of that. But about 2 years ago, I started thinking about technology and space and what that really means for black feminism and for queer people in particular. And I did this course, which was sort of all about coding and learning to program, and nothing on the course ever sort of mentioned any of these issues, and why should it? It was run by literally all white men, and they were very nice, but they had no idea what I was getting at when I was kind of saying, but why do all the websites look the same? Why have we not learned about security? Why have we not learned anything about, like grassroots movements? Why are we only learning about Yahoo and Facebook and Google? Why are we only learning about Facebook APIs? You know what I mean? Like, why is there nothing about how to build something kind of from the ground up? And so I've kind of come here with a little bit of an agenda, which is really you couldn't guess already, which is really to kind of ask that question of why technology and why technology isn't at the forefront of the queer movement. That is kind of my question. As somebody who doesn't come from that background, but who is kind of a bystander and who's kind of looking into it, I'm kind of like, why is that not a sort of huge major part of it? Now, a lot of people are probably thinking, okay, but we have like Black Twitter, we have a lot of activism online, and that's really true. But actually, what I'm saying is actually sort of from the back end of things. So yeah, we use Twitter, but who owns Twitter? We use Facebook, but who owns Facebook? We use Gmail, but who owns Gmail? And to me, that actually reflects some of the problems that is facing like queer people, black queer people in particular, and black feminists in particular, which is that a lot of the stuff we do, we don't actually own it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we go to these places, we go to the South Bank, we have a great time, and the rest of it. We don't own anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, how many black queer women own a major sort of technological platform? There's one woman, there's one black billionaire, and she owns Xerox, and that's pretty cool. But, there's literally one that I can think of, you know what I mean? And I've kind of been looking into this quite a lot. And I think it really speaks to a lot of the problems that we're facing, which is about space and about ownership. Representation was the real sort of theme of, I would say, like 10, 15 years ago, but it's still kind of being sort of hammered on, yet ownership isn't so much a theme, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's really strange that we don't question why we use all of these platforms and how that actually negatively impacts us. And maybe that actually by using these platforms and generating huge profits for people while organizing protests is actually a bit of a contradiction. I mean, I don't know, it could be, maybe I'm wrong. But that was really the main thing that kind of came up for me, and I don't want to kind of take up too much time like rambling about that, but that was really the thing that came up for me. And it just seemed like such a huge mirror of the sort of problems that we're having with space and things being closed down and having nowhere and having nothing that is permanent, not in the way that it once was anyway. So that's kind of my sort of spiel and my kind of thing really, so yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay, if the lights flash, I guess it means it's me. Alright, maybe I'll just start and we'll see what happens. So I was rereading the Many Voices, One Chant issue, and then I reread the issue 108, and one of the modes of continuity, one of the issues of continuity is, unsurprisingly, terminology. And so intersectionality and political blackness being the kind of flashpoints for these conversations. And I think that Nydia's contribution is probably the best that I've read on political blackness. And so I'd like to just read you a quotation from that I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of days. So that quotation is that political blackness is a politics of solidarity, nothing more, nothing less. From nothing more, I take it to mean that it is not a theory of subjectivity. It is not something that we are, but something that we do. From nothing less, I take that we must aim for nothing less, that solidarity is something to be achieved and not assumed. So from this point of terminology and solidarity, I'd like to ask the question of how we act in solidarity with those that might not share our language, not just English as that's the language that many of us speak, but our political language. I think that often black feminism inadvertently privileges those with longer histories in Britain, or in the case of black British feminism at least. It privileges more settled communities, and especially communities from former British colonies. So I guess I'd like to ask the question of how we can develop a politics of solidarity between more settled and newer migrant communities. I've been thinking about this a lot as I've been watching this shift to the right in the last 10 years, and the way in which black and British Asian people are suddenly becoming spokespersons for anti-migrant sentiment. And so this is something that I feel that as black feminists we need to make our voice very heard about. Last year, as part of the Anti-Raids Network, which is an organisation I'm involved with, we do workshops around your legal rights during an immigration raid or an immigration check. I was lucky enough to spend some time with a group called Justice for Domestic Workers. And this is a group of women from all over the world, though mostly from the Philippines or from Indonesia. And many of them, in the course of this workshop, and then some subsequent workshops that used theatre as a kind of way into talking about people's stories, talked about separation from their children, talked about precarious status and delayed visa applications. This really made me think about Nydia. I'm sure many of the women in the room will be very familiar with Nydia's story, and I'm sure many of you will know it much, much better than I do. I mostly learnt about her story from reading Anandi Ramamurthy's book, Black Star, about the Asian youth movements. And now Nydia was a woman, a British Pakistani woman, who fought for 6 years to have her children brought over from Pakistan because the British state did not believe that they were really her children, nor that she was really who she said she was. And listening to these women at the Justice for Domestic Workers project, I really felt how much many of their stories resonated with hers. And as I mentioned her name to them, it was apparent that, as you might expect, really none of them had heard her name. And I realised that I didn't feel that I knew enough to be able to tell her story in a way that was meaningful. And so I think that it made me think there's an obvious continuity of forms of oppression, particularly state oppression, but there are gaps in our strategies of resistance. And so looking at these two issues together, especially the recent issue and the way it looks back, I think it's really important to think about how we can share strategies of resistance. I think that sharing stories is a way of building strength, but that we also need to look at how past victories were won and how we can communicate those victories and how we got there to new generations of migrant communities in Britain. So that's all from me.
I've just, hang on, am I close enough? Yeah, okay. I've just got a couple of phrases and questions really that came up. They were not explicitly talked about in our huge 4-hour, very wide-ranging conversation. But when I came to look back at it, to prepare for this, I suddenly had this thought that a lot of what for me is really interesting in reading the first issue at this 30-year remove from it, and I hadn't encountered it before I was invited to take part in this project, was about chosen family, which is a phrase that's bandied around a lot in various forms of sexuality and gender politics, and it carries within it a set of assumptions that you need to choose a new family because your old family are going to be phobic or going to reject you. And as someone who spent a lot of time doing sexuality and gender writing, activism and organising in very white-dominated communities, I banged into a thing which is commented on, I think it's commented on in the 1984 article, but it's certainly, I pulled this off my shelf, which was the first book I ever found, which there are definitely people in this room who are in this. It's called Talking Black, Lesbians of African and Asian Descent Speak Out. It's from 1995, and it was the first thing that I ever encountered that spoke to these questions of critiques, for example, of what was already spoken about, that there's a monolithic idea of what family is, what it means to you, how you've interacted with it, that there is a trajectory where you leave behind a family in order to find a new happy queer family, for example. And a lot of what I find most interesting about the looking back, for me, comes into a set of questions about what happens when we choose family, or what happens when we refuse that easy categorization. Oh, sorry, I'm quite nervous, so I tend to go around in circles, but the thing I was going to say that is commented on in here as well, that I experienced a lot of, was the assumption, the baseline assumption from white people, white LGBTQ people, white activists, white academics, that my family were necessarily phobic, that I had like the brown patriarchal dad, that I am not out. We talked early on in the piece that one of the things that we did feel quite differently about was that there's a conversation in the first black lesbian discussion about whether the participants will use their names or not. And one thing that we kind of got to grips with very quickly was that there are some specific, I've done work on BDSM, and that's the environment in which I had to think quite carefully about whether I wanted to write that under my own name or not. But we, I think, in general, talked about how we felt that there was quite a difference in that 30-year period of naming of the relationship between whether we didn't really feel that we needed to have a conversation about whether we could use our real names, I think. But one of the things that I chose to use my real name, that I chose to do that, was because I had encountered so much presumption that I couldn't be public about my work, that I couldn't be me, because, and here is where this huge stereotype kind of rolls into play, that the kind of journey is from a necessarily phobic brown family into a beautiful, accepting white queer family. And some of you will know that's not my experience, although that was a story that was told to me again and again. And it makes me come back to this question of intergenerational conversations, which I think is so important. And I think it's so important that issues like this exist, but also that rooms exist where people can talk directly to each other, because what often happens with hegemonic knowledge is that in between the people who really need to have the conversations, whether that's racialised women, whether that's queer people of colour, whether that's trans people of colour, whether that's activists working on race and sexuality and gender in Britain, what often happens is that white hegemonic knowledge stands in between the people who need to have the conversation. And so I think the thing I wanted to say was that I find rooms like this really important, because for me, in almost all of my experiences in these rooms, someone has pointed me to something that has cut through a lot of that kind of interpolation. Sorry, blathering a bit, but it feels very important to think about this in terms of who we choose to be familial with and how we keep those connections going, and how they're fractious sometimes and difficult, but why we do that.
To the Feminist Review Collective for inviting me to participate on this panel, and even for inviting me to submit a piece. I was actually really quite flattered when I was asked, because given where I am in my academic career, if you will, I was just a little bit taken aback. And in fact, when I sort of started writing this piece, I was actually spending a lot of time at the Black Culture Archives reviewing the papers of Stella Doddsey, which includes the organizational records of OWAD, some of which Anne included in her presentation. And I was also listening to the oral histories from the Heart of the Race collection. And I was also at the same time looking at periodicals at the Feminist Library, like the We Are Here Black Feminist newsletter, and listening to relevant oral histories at the British Library in the Sisterhood and After collection. And the thing that kept coming up again and again is contestation surrounding this term black. And there's the very thing that Anne sort of identified, these struggles have always been happening. And this idea of who qualifies and who deserves to qualify as black. And at the same time, I was actively involved in Black Feminist UK, attending events hosted by groups like Freedom Without Fear platform and Black Women's Forum UK, and meeting with women who work at Southall, like Sisters in Con. And as we all know, these groups use black and continue to use black in the political sense. And there are, of course, some of these ongoing tensions within these different spaces about whether or not this idea of political blackness really works. And I've encountered this on numerous occasions throughout the course of my research, especially if I said that as a black feminist from the United States living in Britain, I was really intrigued by this notion of political blackness, and that I really wanted to document that history and to capture its relevance to contemporary black British feminisms. But in general, at least in the black feminist circles that I've operated during the time I live here, this concept is embraced. And that doesn't mean it isn't problematized, but it is largely embraced. And I really kind of want to stress that in light of some of the discussions that have been happening of late. And so the limits, the tensions, and even the potentiality of political blackness as a framework for solidarity is what I tried to address in the article, looking specifically at the rise and fall of OWOD, with the aim of bringing that conversation into what's happening now and some of these debates that are happening now. And of course, that is a continued conversation about the extent to which deploying black in this way does the work that it used to. And if, to paraphrase the authors of Lesbians Talk Making Black Waves, which are the same authors of the text that you pulled up there, which I thought was kind of awesome, the notion of political blackness truly succeeds in being inclusive as and intersectional as it sets out to be. And then the question I kind of was thinking about is, what then do we as black feminists do to make sure that it is? And so just some of the questions I kind of want to throw out that maybe we can consider in the Q&A session is, does using black in this way continue to serve to center and recenter whiteness? And really, what are the potential downsides and limitations to this? And what do we make of anti-blackness, shadism, or colorism within communities of color that we might characterize as black? And this point was touched on a bit in the contribution from Camel, Jay, and Sita. But that was about this idea of these new histories of movement to Britain, which is really bringing with it an array of differently situated diasporic identities and experiences. And of course, there are new migrant categories than when this idea of political blackness, was first originated. I mean, we have people who are coming as refugee and asylum seekers, as labor, student, and even highly skilled employment migrants. And this is creating, from the way that I look at it, new displacements outside of and hierarchies within this idea of Britishness. And I think that there might be, maybe we should start thinking about if there are other ways to talk about that as a feminist struggle. I mean, maybe we need to extend the term in a little bit and talk about that. And last but certainly not least, I think we should really think about how to problematize or challenge this notion of political blackness without undermining the legacy of the activists and scholars whose work has been pivotal to the strength of black British feminism. And I really want to kind of stress that as a key point. So these are just some of the things that I'm grappling with as a researcher and as a black feminist, particularly as a black feminist of African descent. And as I said, I was just thinking these might be questions we could consider in the following discussion. Thank you.
I think I really have to open by saying thank you to all the women that are in the room that have gone before us and made our journey so much more easier in some ways. It's really special to be here and have the opportunity to share. My contribution to the article was about thinking flowers and whether or not that is eco-feminist activism. And Thinking Flowers for me is an organisation I started 11 years ago, and it works with the ethical practice of floral design in the city. It looks at the ethics, sustainability and the engagement of the cut flower industry and the position of this in our everyday urban lives. For me, really, starting an organisation was a way to be bigger, to be badder, and to do things that I couldn't really do if I put my name to. I think I was always being told that maybe I shouldn't do the things that I want to do, but for me it was a necessity. Making art with flowers was something that I had to do in order to speak, in order to communicate the things that I couldn't say or write, or the things that I shouldn't do. Anne was talking earlier about the deaths of young black boys, and that is actually what led me to work with flowers. It was after 5 funerals that I thought that flowers were actually something that talked about reproduction. They talked about our possibility for regrowth and to regain beauty in life. And I think really that's what my artwork's about. It's about us looking at beauty as a way to challenge, a non-violent way to challenge violence in our everyday lives. So I guess I really want to share with you things that aren't in the article, because you can find out stuff there. And I think what isn't in the article is why I started to work with floral installation, which is a practice that I brought about to encompass a way to work within sculpture, performance art and the healing arts. For me really, I needed to find a way to express change really, an idea and a possibility for positive change for me and my position in the world. I'm really kind of exploring that now through a series of work called Cleanse, which offers people the opportunity to stop in their busy everyday lives and consider what it is they want to make cleaner, shinier, what it is they want to get rid of, what it is they want to leave behind in their life. So Thinking Flowers has a question mark because I love questions and I love to disrupt and to interrupt. So I'm going to stop talking now. Hopefully you've got some questions for me later.
Evening, sorry. In 2011, Professor Joan and Adu did an event around black feminism, and I spoke. And I'm going to give a shout out to Gemma at the front because it's, in some ways, all of this has been about relationships as well. And somebody mentioned earlier, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but often relationships are how we get to where and achieve the things that we do. And Gemma told Joan, let her speak, basically, which gave me an opportunity to share what I felt was going on within feminism at the time and archives, but it's also led me to this point. And in some ways, that's what I'm interested in, how we get to certain points. But what I would like to do is take one of my minutes to actually, one of my 5, to actually just do a minute of silence. I did that in 2011, that's how I began. And I would like to give a moment to the people that aren't here. Lauren just sort of mentioned, but I'd like us to just take a moment and a minute to just reflect, because there are a lot of people that aren't with us, there are a lot of people that have made things possible, and there are a lot of people that we basically miss, kind of thing. So we'll take it from, I'll count you in. Close your eyes if you want it, but we're going to take a minute. Thank you, that's beautiful. I'm going to talk about the fact that I studied here a few years ago. I graduated in design in 2000 at Goldsmiths. And the reason why I mention that is only because I left the place thinking, I hate this place, I'm never coming back. And I mean that seriously. This was the place that actually taught me about race, that taught me that actually I'm not just ego, I'm black ego. You know, that's how people see me. I see you as Jay. But actually, yeah. And that was a very interesting thing for me. So to be back here in this space, when I used to study just around the corner, this building wasn't built. I used to smoke around the back of here. And but however, I mention that because this place has also been crucial in order to actually write this piece, to have this piece written. As mentioned in our biographies, I'm a member of X Marks the Spot, a research group, art research group that's based at the Women's Art Library, and for over a year we've sort of kind of adopted this space and adopted Althea Greenan, who has given us access basically, and through that access we got our cards and we've been informally here, which has given us access to Joan, which has given us access to a lot of things. And that's been crucial to our progress. While doing this piece, we'd not lost, but the Women's Project disappeared, the space that we would use, the charity that we would use. There are no faces here. I know from that space, a lot of people on this panel, I know from that space. So we needed to find different ways to still do the things that we knew that we cared about, and not just cared about, knew that needed to be done. I wrote my piece with Eula Bruin, and it's funny, seeing some of the people that have written today, it was sort of like, never done anything like this before, oh my God, how did you find it? And it was tough. I just want to express that it was tough because it also had a physical response to us, like, I was lucky to do it as a pair because it meant I couldn't really hide. I had somebody else to sort of bounce off and be responsible for. If I didn't have that, I don't know if I would have been able to actually achieve it. I also want to talk about the weekend that we had. That kind of kicked off the beginning of this project. We had a weekend away in Uckfield, about 20 of us, 20-something women, and it was a very, very important space and a very magical space. We had walks early morning. I didn't actually go on in here. Some of them went on early morning walks. There was dominoes, there was singing, very similar to what Dorothea, that kind of sort of spirit. But needing time, sometimes the privilege of time to do work like this is a luxury that never really gets mentioned. And I really want to applaud everybody that managed to get a piece in for this publication. It's an important year. It's the same year that Black Cultural Archives opened their new building. So to be part of a year like this and to be included in something like this, but also to have our voice be counted, because what I started to notice was I'd been involved with the charity Women's Project for years and years, and strangely, all the activity that I might have been involved with, I started to see written about, but I never really got mentioned. And yeah, that could be my own ego, but hey, I don't think it's just about my ego, because it's also about, if I'm not mentioned, then a lot of other people never get mentioned, and a lot of other people, and it carries on that cycle. So realising that we actually had to be witnesses to ourselves and actually say that we are here, which has also been an element of this project. We are here. We have been here. We are part of things that, we are part of things, and often maybe our experience and the commonality that we've had is that often we could be the only black face within a lot of, we could be the black face within an event, and often sometimes, I'm looking at you lot, but, and that's often occurs, but what happens is that even though you're completely not invisible, you become invisible, and I find that absolutely intriguing, how that actually comes to be, is that you could be the one black person in a space, but still completely invisible. Okay, I know, I'll wrap up now. But basically, the other thing that I want to mention about that weekend, in light of the UCL event earlier this year, Why Isn't My Professor Black? It happened, I think, in March at UCL. A really good conference. But on that weekend, we had 3 professors. We had 3 black female professors. And that even in itself is a massive, massive, and the knowledge that we were able to share and exchange over that weekend is priceless, and also has brought me to this point today. So I just want to say a huge thank you and well done to everybody.
For your contributions. We do now have, I think, I would say 20 minutes because we did start late. Is that okay? Yeah. For questions, because it is a big theatre, we've got microphones, so just wave your hand if you'd like to make a question or a comment.
I might as well start. I just have to say, I don't know whether to feel great about the fact that I'm feeling quite old, because a lot of the things that have been referenced today are things that I've lived through. And I'm still part of Salvo Black Sisters, which is still going strong, and we are now in our 35th year. Yeah, I mean, I know that some of you have raised this issue about political blackness, I feel quite strongly, I mean, it's a sort of argument that makes me actually want to sigh a little bit and think, we've done this, and as Anne was saying, of course, a lot of struggles end up being recursive, but it'd be nice to be able to put some struggles to bed and think, okay, we've dealt with that. But of course, it's something that does recur. And I think for me, it's very much, it actually is an indication of where people's politics lie. It's a kind of a shortcut to saying how, whether you stand on the progressive or the sort of reactionary side of things. I know that sounds slightly crude, but when in kind of public settings, we get asked this question a lot, especially if you're speaking on behalf of Southall Black Sisters. Why do you call yourselves black? A lot of the time, it might be an Asian woman who is representing Southall Black Sisters. Sometimes we might end up, just for the sake of the kind of, out of convenience, we might make the argument that actually we deal with, we do have black women, we do have African Caribbean women on our management committee, and we also deal with a lot of Somali women, based as we are in Southall. But I think that it is important there's a kind of an openness, an open-endedness to the idea of the black identity, and shutting it down, I feel, opens the doors to other kinds of narrownesses. So, for example, when you insist upon Asian, then you insist upon Indian, then you insist upon Pakistani, and down to your religious identities. And I think that that's actually very, very dangerous, and I think it's divisive at the end of the day. So I think it is really important to hold on to that wider umbrella, recognizing that there are, of course, tensions within that. Thanks.
Got a question for Jay. I was just wondering did you learn how to make our own Twitter?
Yes.
Where is it?
Well, you need millions of pounds as well, and you also need loads and loads of time, and you need space, and I have neither of those things. So, and actually when I was on Facebook, I did a number of times ask people if they wanted to meet up and discuss this kind of thing. I liked
that comment.
You did like that comment? Great, yeah. I think you may be one person. Yeah, exactly, right? But then it just never happened. And every time Sita, every time I've been to your house, you've been I've been we need to do that. But it's just one of these things where I do feel like I'm the only person sort of banging on about that within my social group, and I'm sure there's loads of people in here who probably have the same thought. So I did learn to do these things, but I'm also not that gifted technically, I've got to be honest, and it really requires somebody who's really, really into coding and programming, because I like it, but I'm also happy to not do it as well. And that's the difference between me and Mark Zuckerberg. He was happy to go and rent a house and build something, and you know what I mean? That's the real difference. That's what we really need. Moving on.
Hello. Just to continue on that point, though, there's a great deal to be said for making trouble in other people's houses. So that the question of ownership raises certain concerns for me, for example, because so much radical organizing has been basically cannibalized by capital, so that what we're looking at is, racial capitalism that runs a lot and sort of consumes a lot of the energy of this politics and this organizing. So I just wanted to sort of raise the point that ownership, fine, but also just simply to occupy sort of in disobedient and it sounds sort of willful ways might also be a useful thing to sort of hold on to. Just because there's a price to be paid if you go ownership, for me.
I think you're right, but I also think that if you don't own the things that you use, then it's owned by somebody else. So a lot of the stuff that we use is free, but a lot of that stuff, it's for exactly in inverted commas. So they literally profit off every mouse click, every keystroke that you make. So to me, it doesn't really make any sense that you would be fighting against capitalism and against the sort of problems of capitalism on a platform that then uses that money to further fund capitalist engines. That seems to me a really strange idea. And actually, what really bothers me is that, like, I use a lot of other platforms, like Rise Up, for example. I'm sure loads of people use Rise Up. And I watch Democracy Now!, for example, and it really shocks me how many times I go onto these websites and they are begging for money from people, absolutely begging, because regardless of what you think about, you know, the master's tools and the master's house, you need money in order to get out of the system that we're in. You know what I mean? So if you can find a solution that gets us out of the system that we're in without somehow creating something that, you know, sort of rises above it and transcends it, I'd love to know, but I haven't been able to come across that yet, so yeah.
I absolutely agree. This is a matter of the perennial matter of working in the system, thank you, of working in the system or against the system, of creating an alternative reality to the system we are frameworked in, or actually working within it, kind of against it and kind of in the line. It's really difficult and it's a very interesting conversation. And it's a question of, you know, whether the hen was first or the egg was first. It's really difficult, and I actually work in a corporation. I work in an open source, you probably know what I'm talking about, a corporation that creates code in a community. So I totally know what you're talking about, and I know how the framework looks from underneath, so to speak, the undergrowth of the system, or the underside of a carpet. So that I have experienced what you have experienced, and this is true. It's male, it's patriarchal, it's capitalist, even in the so-called open source community, even if it claims it's free. So now the big question is, how do we create an alternative reality living in this constricted framework that we are currently based in? And I also wanted to talk about inclusive behaviors and what Black feminist movement right now is to me. I'm white. I'm as white as a snowflake. Yes, I know. But I'm also Polish. I'm also 30. I also have very impoverished family back home. My partner suffers from schizophrenia. I support him. And for the last 8 years, it was a struggle. And I can actually empathize and sympathize with the movement very well, because I have been discriminated against. In a very similar way, I feel that Black women have been in the past. And I did study Black empowerment history. I wrote my PhD dissertation on Malcolm X, so I know what I'm talking about. So I went into studies on feminism later on. But I'm from communist Poland. I was born when Russian tanks were on the streets, and we were not allowed to leave the country. So for me, education, conversation, and inclusivity is very important. Therefore, I would like to be adopted, can I? By the Black movement. And I'm rambling right now. I'm not so used to speaking out in public in front of so many academic people. But yeah, I'm very grateful and very happy to be here after 9 hours of work, doing some coding. So thank you all very much for listening to me. And yeah, apologies for rambling.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I love you all. I thought you're just beautiful and gorgeous, and I'm so proud of you. Really am, you know. And yeah, like Ahaiwe was saying, I'm old enough to be your mother. And you know, but I don't have. I always get asked, you know, have you got any kids? And the Ethiopian guy who drove me in the cab that I came in, when I said I didn't, he had that kind of look in his eye, like, you know, like, oh, never mind. I said, I have children of my heart, not children of my womb. And you're children of my heart, you know. And so, yeah, and he thought that was me kind of trying to make up for the fact that I was infertile. I think that I wanted to ask about, what was it? I think for me, just having had a quick flick through, because I haven't seen the issue and I was sitting there flicking through, and the thing that stands out for me is like one thing that is like hugely different to
the issue number 17 is your piece. We would never have had your piece in our issue, because it would have just been like apolitical, too wacky, too like airy-fairy, you know, it's like we're sort of real, this is, you know, we're real hard political women, we can't be dealing with this, you know, it's like when people need to eat, you know, kind of thing, you know. But I mean, there is the, you know, that not just bread but roses kind of quote as well, you know. However, just yesterday, when I was in Barbados with my research assistant, who's in late 30s, mother of 6, yeah, and we were working together, and Jessie J came on the radio. Oh, actually, she was playing her. She was having a day because she just split up with a girl, and this is after 19 years of. I'm sorry, I'm telling the woman business here. I mentioned her name. After 19 years of marriage to a guy that she met when she was like 16, 17, and now they're in the middle of the divorce sort of thing, and what have you, and she. Anyway, yeah, ended up falling in love with this woman, which was a huge shock to her. But they've now split up, you know, because she thought it was like for life, and obviously the other woman didn't. And we were listening to how does that one go? It's about the money, money, money. Yeah, and, right, and she was like, and she just, you know, said out of the blue. I know people keep saying that, don't they? They keep saying like, well, you know, it's not just about the money, it's not important, and I really struggle with that. I really do, she said. And I was like, why? And she said, well, you know, when you're sending your kids together, you're sending your kids to bed hungry. It is about the money, and I'm sorry, I can't feed my kids beauty.
I know what you mean, yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I said, you got a point. And I said, to be fair, you know, I'm one of those people who sort of say it's not all about the money. However, as somebody who at times struggles financially, never mind we just come off a plane from Barbados, you don't make financial situation, thank you very much. But, you know, and people make all kinds of assumptions, you know. What would you say to that? Because I mean, you know, I had to sort of say, well, you're right. And I also had to sort of fess up and say, well, like, you know, a lot of people who say this, like, oh, it's not about the money, you know, it's about, like, you know, my art or whatever it is. They've never been hungry. Like, all right, they might have gone without, like, you know, the latest, you know, iPad or iPhone or whatever, but they've now been hungry.
I get you.
Yeah? What would you say to her?
Well, funny that you brought up that song, because my sister-in-law was in a court case with Jessie J about that exact same song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think she wrote it. But I've just actually come back from Barbados as well. Like, which is quite funny. But you're absolutely right. You know, flowers weren't just something to me that were simply about beauty. Of course, it is that which attracted me first, because they're stunning and they talk about life and colour. But actually, when we talk about an economic stability, they inspired me to start a social enterprise, an award-winning social enterprise that has made global impact, challenged large organisations like the banks we bank with, Royal Bank of Scotland, in a non-violent way, forcing them to change the way they procure, to then work with small organisations, to work with ethical organisations, to have art within their AGMs that challenges them to think about the women that are having their reproductive systems depleted because they're working with pesticides and not being protected, to fly flowers which are 90% water to the from the driest parts of the world to the wettest parts of the world. So flowers for me become a political, symbolic, economic, spiritual, emotional, physical symbol for the way that us as women are at the bottom of the chain of capitalist economies. And so it was essential for me to infiltrate those large organisations that are profiting again and again on money off the back of our people. And then it gets into the areas that, you know, Jay's exploring about being part of the system or against the system. But starvation, you know, it wasn't going to be an option. And there was points within the business model that I was probably earning as much as the women farmers on the other end of the scale. And I had to look at myself and had to look at whether my creative practice was going to continue to drive the organisation. And it was actually a beautiful woman called Claire Dove who saw what I was doing and pushed me in front of crowds and introduced me to the people that I needed to sustain the organisation and to be able to employ the people that I employed and to run the apprenticeships, the international volunteering, and really gave me the opportunity to, how can I say it?
Be uplifted, empowered.
No, to be disruptive, to interrupt the course of the normal course of flowers just being, you know, a expression of high economic wealth. You know, like floristry in itself. We look at like floristry in itself as an art. It's not even considered an art. It's considered a craft, and it's pushed into the side of the art world. It's something that women do at the WI. You know, so me coming in to that field, you know, doing Chelsea Flower Show, like, I can't even begin to tell you the discrimination that I faced and the complexity of the different types of discrimination. But somebody has to do it, as challenging as it is. Somebody has to say, well, this is my purpose. I'm brought here to work with flowers. This is what I'm meant to do. And if flowers can bring about big messages in their beauty, then I'm going to use that because that's what speaks to me. And I think actually that it is our lack, as black women, our lack of connection in urban environments to nature, which is one of the things that stops us from being as powerful as we are. And it is that which I go back to seek refuge and to find the energy I need to take the next challenge, to face the next element of discrimination.
Our panellists, and I don't know if any of the panellists wanted to make a final last comment. Yeah, there you go. And
Sure. I'm sorry, yeah. I just want to say the importance of carrying on writing collectively and finding spaces to write collectively, and for this not to take another 30 years to do something like this.
I suppose I'd like to just say one final word about this question of kind of within or outside of the system, and I think that Feminist Review does an amazing thing of giving and creating institutional power for women to have autonomous thought, and I think that that combination is really incredible and something that we should really celebrate.
I've got a very small thing which I'd be really interested in talking to people about, which is that we're talking about all of this work, and we're talking about doing it in London, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world. In Britain, it's when I was thinking about leaving a very white, very middle class, very racist place, I looked at a map and basically had 2 or 3 options of a place that I could stay in this country. That's one of the real things of living a life at an intersection of race, gender, sexuality. The place that's most suitable, the place where I have most of my community, which is physically accessible to me as a person with disabilities, is also this insanely expensive city that's run by Boris and Co. And I know that a lot of the work that's flourished over the last 30, 40 years has been from people who are at that hard edge of economics. And what do we do about that?
And lastly, I just want to thank the volunteers, Chandra Frank, Morgan Conti, Lynette Monique Robler, Tiffany Page, Layla Whiteley, sorry if I've mispronounced your names, and Marlene Edwin. I don't know if Marlene's here. She's outside. Well, thanks very much.
Back in the day, one of the issues that we had serious blind spot about was anything to do with transgender, anything, yeah? Anything to do, and if we looked at things about not being binary, that was just around kind of, around like the issues of race and ethnicity and things like that, you know. But we still fell into the trap of the either or when it came to kind of looking at male, female, man, woman, lesbian or gay, you know, and the poor old bisexuals got given quite a hard time, you know. This poem I hope addresses some of the things that I am kind of relieved and proud that are represented here, you know. This poem speaks to my religion. When I was coming in at the airport, this little kid said, "Mummy, that lady looks like a snowman." So that's the lady who's the man, because anyway, yeah, so that was me, right? And that's the thing about intersectionality and the trans thing, and the fact that, yeah, anyway. And it's a poem for Eshu. And Eshu is a Yoruba deity that is about being at a crossroads, yeah? And Eshu is very much about, do you go this way or do you go that way? But in fact, the energy of Eshu, the strength of Eshu's energy is being in the middle of everything and being in that at that crossroads, yeah. And I'm wearing white today, not because I want to look like a snowman, because my father in the religion is Obatala, and this is the start of 9 days of wearing white, but for people within my religion, or wearing white is his colour, and don't let me go there. White is his colour, as in like white clouds, white snow, you know, purity. And so it's a 9-day purification that all of us priests in the religion are doing towards world peace. Yeah? Huh? I say priest the same way I say actor, because people don't say doctress anymore, they say a doctor, and everybody knows a doctor is a man or a woman, an actor is a man or a woman, or a priest is a man or a woman or a trans person, somewhere in between all of that. So I don't do the S thing. I'm not a poetess as a poet. Right. Eshu. Cuban fusion. The squat Eshu cook works the kitchen, mischievous with gender. Is you is or is you ain't? Hermano, hermanos. Flicking ash with a flourished question mark, turning back to steamy pots, doing what they do best, mixing, stirring ingredients to make something altogether enhancing to the taste. Thank you.
You leave your home for days and days, and I know, I said I know,